From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome to Potomac Watch, the daily opinion podcast of the Wall Street Journal. My name is Paul Gigot. I'm the editor of those pages. And 12 days out from Election Day, the 2024 presidential and congressional races are historically close. The presidential race is essentially tied, especially in the 7 swing states that look like they will decide the outcome. My guest today is Mark Penn, a longtime Democratic Party pollster and ran the polling for the Clinton campaign. That's Bill Clinton. In 1996. Now he's CEO of the Stagwell Group, and he has been conducting the Harvard-Harris CAPS poll that has been following the 2024 race from the beginning. We'll talk about where the race stands now, how events are trending, and what to watch for in the final days. Welcome, Mark. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So where does the race stand now? I would preface this, your last survey in October, early October, found that Kamala Harris has a 1.7 lead among likely voters nationally. But in battleground states, Donald Trump had a 2-point lead among both likely and registered voters. So where does that leave us?
Well, look, in many ways, we have reached the limits of polling as we know it. Polling is about a plus or minus 4-point range. I've hit many races on the nose. The Harris poll last time was the most accurate poll. I give the edge to Trump because at the end of the day, when these very few undecided voters go into the polls, are they going to be thinking, darn, I just can't continue the last 3.5 years? Or are they going to be thinking, darn, I just can't bring Donald Trump back? And I think that's kind of what's going on in the heads of these voters, because essentially they like Kamala Harris in many ways personally, and they like the policies of Donald Trump.
And you think the policy direction will have a slight edge when all is said and done? That's the basis for your giving Trump the slight advantage.
Yeah, I'm a believer in what a little book written, I think, around 1960 called The Responsible Electorate. And it says that there is more or less a policy reason at the end of the rainbow of America's choices. And so I kind of think that that's going to dominate. There are some real policy reasons that people prefer Trump. And I think the personal questions tend to neutralize themselves, and people go with policy at the end of the day. So I put as the number one reason he has the edge, the fact that he's winning the big issues. And let's not forget, even though we did not have a national foreign policy debate this election or even in the previous election, that foreign policy does count, and he has pretty good margins on doing a better job on the Ukraine and Israel.
Yeah, that's all very interesting. Your point about policy is one of the things that's the most striking about this election. If I look at the policy mix that voters really care about, the one issue that Kamala Harris and Democrats have a big advantage on is abortion, clearly. And they have a large advantage on that. And it's driving, I think, a lot of support for Harris, particularly among women. But if you look at the other big issues in the race, immigration and border security, inflation and the economy, and kind of a general sense about crime being up, especially in big cities, and then the foreign policy issue, as you say, who's projecting strength and chaos in the world now versus relative peace under Trump. Those are all playing to the advantage of the Republicans generally in the critique of the Biden presidency. And you look historically, and you know this, if you're debating the issues on which, if the electorate is considering a variety of issues and you're on the right side of those, and those are the big issues, you do tend to win.
You raise a lot of things. First, let me say that right now in the closing, it appears that Trump is on offense. Mm-hmm. You know, whether it's at McDonald's or at the Al Smith dinner, he is trying to get core, previously Democratic, working class voters in his column. And clearly she is on defense. Right? She's trying to record the black vote, trying to get 100% or 85% black vote. She's calling Trump a fifth fascist. And those strike me as fundamentally things you do when you're up against the wall and you're on defense, not when you're playing offense. I think on the abortion issue, I think she has done a good job, an excellent job at both portraying her own view, really kind of burying what her view is in the 7th, 8th, and 9th months of pregnancy, and projecting the image that Donald Trump is for a national ban no matter what he says, because most voters believe he is. So I do think she's won that issue, just as I think Donald Trump has won immigration. No matter what she says on immigration, if you're an immigration voter, you're voting for Donald Trump. I think those two camps are 100% exhausted.
On the economy and inflation, she has seemed to have closed the gap of what had been a bigger Trump advantage, but he still has a significant advantage on those.
Yes, I think part of that closing of the gap is simply that people voting for her can't let themselves believe that Donald Trump, because there's a little bit of mystery here on how she's moved so many points on so little policy, comments, interviews, or accomplishments, right?
Right.
So a lot of this has to be that partisanship had to come first. And then, look, if you're a Democrat, somehow you think the economy's good, and if you're a Republican, you think it's bad. So partisanship tends to color a number of facts here. I think she has gotten out this concept of an opportunity economy. I think Trump should have talked more about his economic policy. He believes that immigration is the key issue. It's quite clear, because he will talk probably 3 or 4x on immigration. I think if you're a swing voter at the end of the day, you are not an abortion or immigration voter. You're probably an economy voter. And if I were giving him advice, I frankly would close more on the economy and more on fear of what she would do, if she were at the helm internationally. And if I were her, I would cut out the fascist Hitler stuff, keep pressing how she's a new way forward. And neither of them seem to be listening to any advice that I would give them.
Or for that matter, any advice that I would give them. I agree totally on the economy point with Trump, but he is obsessed with the immigration issue and the border security issue. Clearly, he has a huge advantage on it, but Republicans have had a big advantage on that. They had it in 2022 as well, and it didn't work all that well for them. But Trump is convinced that it gave him the election in 2016, and that's why he's using it today. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll have more with Mark Penn about the 2024 election. I'm Paul Gigot here on Potomac Watch podcast, and I'm here with Mark Penn, the Democratic pollster and head of the Stagwell Group. I want to ask you about the fascist point you make with Harris. I mean, if you look at what's happened over the last week, this has been the main theme that the Harris campaign and her media backers have been driving. I mean, there was a day when she made 3 appearances with Liz Cheney, the former Republican congresswoman who was on the January 6th committee and is committed to defeating Trump because of his character and what she thinks is his authoritarian views. And now they're rolling out the fascist card. She was asked about it on the CNN town hall on Wednesday night. She agreed with those who say Donald Trump is fascist. She said yes. And if you look at the whole orchestration, what I assume is the orchestration of the New York Times interview with former Trump Chief of Staff John Kelly, the Atlantic magazine piece about reprising some of Trump's comments that were widely reported before about Trump's views of the military and even Hitler. I mean, the Fuhrer makes an appearance here, and they're driving this theme. And the question I have is, why do you think that they are doing it? Because it doesn't appear to me to be essentially new information. We've been down this road in 2016 and 2020. Donald Trump is the most famous person on the planet, for better or worse. We've heard this argument before.
Well, because elections are not about whether you heard arguments or not. It is about what the last thought I have when I fill out my ballot, mail it in, show up, what have you, right? And so is my last thought, I just can't bring Donald Trump back. Mm-hmm. Or is my last thought, I just can't continue an open border for another 4 years and bring in another 10 million people who will come across that border without any vetting. And I think that the Harris campaign has decided enough promoting of Harris. She's limited in what she can do. We're not going to win any votes on that anymore. Her favorability is high enough. They're just going to make this on Donald Trump is radioactive. He is Hitler. He is fascist. He's anti-democracy. It worked for Joe Biden. Joe Biden's people are around. And that's clearly where they're going. Now, it's really unfortunate. It is the single most divisive argument one could make going into a campaign. I think that Jews have had enough with using Hitler against people who did not kill 6 million Jews. They find it offensive. I think it is an interesting thing here where she's abandoning Catholics and Jews in many ways in closing on this argument about fascism. That
Why would Catholics be offended?
I don't think they're offended by this. I think that the campaign in general, she didn't show at the Al Smith dinner. She didn't show at the Netanyahu speech. She clearly didn't show at the Al Smith dinner because she was making a choice that she did not want to go to a group that was not necessarily in sync with her position on abortion. I think that they have in some ways alienated a combination of Catholics and Jews in the choices they have made in the last few weeks. And I think they're saying, okay, that they've made a choice. They're going for young, urban, liberal professionals, people in college. They have a coalition and they need to strengthen their minority vote. And I think that they're saying, I'm going for those two groups of voters. Those groups find Donald Trump anathema. I need to get the highest percentage I possibly can among those two groups. Forget the rest. The working class. Donald Trump has successfully targeted specific issues in each of these key industrial states. He is going after the Jewish and Catholic vote, and they are both on two very divergent, separate paths, and their strategies only make sense when you view them that way.
But does that Donald Trump is unacceptable argument work? I mean, I know it gets the Democratic base excited, but does it work with that sliver of swing voters who basically are looking for some reason to make up their minds? Have Harris give them some reason to be able to justify a vote for Harris other than just Donald Trump is disqualified? And I ask that because I listened to the CNN town hall, and those undecided voters, self-declared undecided voters, half of them were begging Kamala Harris, give me a reason, please. Give me a positive reason to vote for you. And she kept returning to Donald Trump is disqualified. And it seems to me to be a puzzle.
It's not a puzzle. They've given up on those voters. Their goal is to increase turnout among those people who buy this argument and motivate them, because it's a motivating argument that Hitler is going to become president. Okay, they don't view it as a motivating argument. Hey, I'm going to do a better job on inflation. I've got a better program. Right? That's not how they see this election closing. Okay. That's not how they see them winning. You know, figuring out what campaigns are doing is like a game of submarine, right? You see what you see, and you have to assume they have a reason for it, and they do.
They're not stupid. Obviously, they're doing this consciously. And you're explaining it to me. I don't know that it's actually going to work, because there are an awful lot of Republicans I know who have all kinds of problems with Donald Trump's character, and they have real doubts about putting him back in the office. But what they fear is the left, right? They fear that the left is going to be another 4 years of this, which they don't like. And what they want to hear from Kamala Harris is, how is this going to be better than the last 4 years? And I think that that's where a lot of Nikki Haley voters, for example, are. And she's not giving them that reason.
And you are not going to hear it. It's not, she is with the left, okay? The left is 100% behind her coalition. She had a choice between Josh Shapiro, the centrist in Pennsylvania, Jewish, I might add, or the governor of Minnesota, and she made her choice. She is being consistent. Win or lose, she has a strategy. God knows, you know, like Jeffrey Goldberg, I hear there are going to be all sorts of other stories. This is just the beginning of a close in which their goal is to make Donald Trump completely radioactive, even if, as you say, they've heard it all before. They're going to hear it again. They want them going to the polls with that notion. Forget about who Kamala Harris is. Forget about the left. Forget about all that stuff. They want you focused on only one thing. You can't possibly vote for Donald Trump. Okay? And that's what they're going to do. They don't care how many forests they have to burn down to make this argument.
Okay. So there's another problem with this argument, and maybe this is partly explains the strategy as well. So the Wall Street Journal, my employer, has come out with a new poll, and this one has Trump up by a couple of points over Harris, a shift of 4 points from the month earlier. But one of the striking things about this poll is when you look at the approve or disapprove numbers for Trump and Harris, and you look at the favorable, unfavorable numbers for Trump and Harris. So let's just get into, do you approve or disapprove of the job Donald Trump did as president? 52% yes, 48% no in that. Harris as VP, 42% approve, 54% disapprove. Then you look at the overall favorable, unfavorable, and Donald Trump is 48 favorable, 50 unfavorable. That's a darn good number for Donald Trump, considering where he was down at 36 in 2022. Now he's up to 48, which is the best in this Wall Street Journal survey for a very long time. And then you look at Harris. Now she's improved her number, but it's 45 favorable, 53 unfavorable. Donald Trump is up there in fave that I didn't think he'd get to. And I guess is the Harris campaign saying we can't let that stand. And that's one of the reasons we need to make this assault on him as combination of, pick your, Hitler, Mussolini, or Stalin, or what have you.
I think they would have done it in any event. I think she's been signaling that that's the way she's going to go. I think that's what you saw in the Bret Baier interview. Bret Baier could ask her how the weather was, and she would have said Donald Trump created all these storms. I don't think it matters what questions she, is asked. But the numbers you cite is why I think Donald Trump has the edge. Mm-hmm. People fundamentally think he did a better job than she did. Fundamentally, they agree with him on the issues. And if it is the responsible electorate, he is going to win. And if it's close enough so that the unpredictable and the unexpected can happen, they have a strategy. I don't think it's the winning strategy, but it's close enough that it could be. That's what I have said for a long time. I said, just look at the two approval numbers. Mm-hmm. This is how voters vote. If 52% approve of the job he did, and even if they've made him the incumbent, which is, I think, one of her objectives, he then is not an incumbent who's at 42%, as Joe Biden is, but he's at 52%. At 52%, as an incumbent, you get reelected. That is what happens.
And if Trump has a personal favorability rating nationally of 48, that means it's higher in the 7 swing states, right?
I think that surviving an assassination in the way he did, a second attempt, doing the Catholic dinner, which I was amused when you actually see it. He did a really solid job, I would say. And the McDonald's thing that showed there's a different Donald Trump, I think he's been gaining in favorability. I think he has been, as we always say, it's Trump against Trump. Which Trump right. is going to win, right? I think he seems to have adopted a demeanor that has allowed his favorable to come up. And it is no small thing to be almost assassinated.
Right. Right. What was striking to me about the McDonald's appearance, and granted it was a obvious photo op for the campaign, but Trump seemed to be enjoying himself, actually. He kind of was having fun, smiling with the apron on and his shirt sleeves and passing out the fries. He did seem to be enjoying it. And that's a contrast to the angry Trump, the bitter Trump, the woe is me Trump. They're indicting me. They hate me. This is a different Trump. You seem to be saying that if that were the Trump you see for the next 12 days, he's going to be a lot better off than if he gets up on stage and starts whinging about Jack Smith.
Exactly. I think that Trump is winning out, is getting a couple of points of favorable. He doesn't need more favorable than 48 when you have 52% job approval. Those are incumbent reelection numbers, and she has to knock them down. And like I said, I think their goal is pretty solid. Their also goal is to get under Trump's skin, so that he breaks back to kind of the worst persona, so that they can say, aha, I told you. And I think, but I always am amused by the mainstream headlines, because it doesn't matter what he says, they still say that. They still depict it. I don't know how much credibility the media can continue to lose in its election coverage.
Yeah, I am with you there. It's been tremendously lopsided, even if you have doubts about Trump, which I certainly do. I look at it, I think a lot of Republicans look at it and say, really? Hitler? Don't think that's probably going to happen. We're going to take another break, and when I come back, Mark Penn will talk about the Senate races and what he sees there when we come back. Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast. That is, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here at Potomac Watch, and I'm with Mark Penn, the Democratic pollster who does the Harvard-Harris CAPS survey of the election. What should our listeners look for here in the next 12 days if they're trying to read the tea leaves about who's going to win?
Well, I think you have to say, how successful is her strategy of painting Trump as Hitler, as fascist, as the unacceptable candidate, no matter who I am, no matter what you think about how I'll govern, and how successful that has been. And then I think on the other side, how Trump continues to push what I would call a targeted campaign of fracking in Pennsylvania, auto jobs in Michigan, immigration in Arizona, no tax on tips in Nevada. I think he had a very interesting strategy of having crafted local issues for each of these. And I think how he continues to push it, how he continues to make this, more, even if he just stresses immigration the way he likes, then you and I may think it's over the top. He is growing salience of the issue because you're right. Republicans didn't get much out of that issue until migrants started to show up in cities and cost local governments billions of dollars. Before then, they just said, oh, Texas has to pay that money. Who cares? And this became a national problem. And so I think what he is trying to do is she has to increase salience of the abortion issue. There are, in fact, more abortions this year rather than fewer after the Supreme Court. She has to drive the salience of it. He's going to continue to drive the salience. So I look for those things. And as a poll reader, I hope the polls are right. I always say that they're snapshots in time and which cancer is growing and where. And so what you're seeing, if the Wall Street Journal poll is right, you're seeing that she topped out. She got to a certain point, and then people began to question, what does she really stand for? Who is she really? What is her experience? And she didn't come forward. And her answer is, I'm from a middle-class family, and you can't vote for Donald Trump. That is her answer. It is going to stick. And Trump, as you're right, he has hit territory that I did not believe he could hit, and he has stayed up there. So he's got 2 weeks to keep it together, and the Democrats are going to throw everything they can at his personal character.
Okay, so we hear a lot about turnout, obviously, every election, but the Democrats are touting their turnout operation, and I think it's probably better than Trump's, who's kind of seems to be a more ad hoc. It's not based on party organization. It's based on Charlie Kirk's Turning Point Action. Elon Musk is putting up a group of door knockers and phone callers. But we don't know how effective that will actually be. Whereas the Democratic Party in a place like Michigan or Arizona, Nevada historically, have been pretty darn good at this. And the implosion in the Republican Party in Michigan and Arizona, for example, has been notable over the last half dozen years. And Democrats may be calculating that they have enough of an advantage, maybe a point or two on that with the Harris strategy of trying to make Trump anathema, they can get over the finish line.
If I have a minute, I'll explain the math of mail-in voting. So let's say I have 100 voters and the election is 50-50. So now let's say half of them vote by mail. And it's evenly distributed. So that's 25-25 vote by mail. Of the other 50, only 45 are going to show up. Their kid gets sick. They're needed at work, right?
Snowstorm, yep.
Snowstorm, they're going to split 27.5 each way. So it's still an even race, right? 47.5. But suppose now that most of my voters are mail-in voters, and most of their voters are drive-in voters or election day voters. When that 10% comes off, it comes off more from the Republican Party. The Republican Party has been losing about 2 points by winning Election Day by 2/3 and losing mail-in voters by 2/3, right?
Right.
And that's an honest 2 points just on the math of the way elections work. Now, it appears someone in the Republican Party finally figured this out. And looking at how they close the mail-in difference is, I think, worth 2 points to the Republicans. And if it is really as close as the polls say, that is the most important turnout issue.
That's really interesting. The early mail vote in two places in particular have struck me. One is Georgia and one is Nevada. In both cases, the early count suggests that Republican turnout, mail-in vote, has been up significantly as a share of the total, which may bode well for the Trump campaign. That's kind of the most significant early details that I get. I don't know, what else have you noticed?
No, that's what it seems like. They are closing the gap, and I think they can pick up one of those 2 points. One day they will figure out that most of the 100 million people who don't vote are downscale white non-college men, and that actually the Democrats would never want everybody to vote in a million years.
Yeah, what a reversal that is from the 90s when the Democrats wanted the big turnout and Republicans didn't mind if there was a low turnout. Just to ask quickly, and I appreciate your time, Mark, the Senate races. There are a lot more that are competitive now with Republican gains in the polling in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and Pennsylvania. You add those three to what looks like a likely victory for Republicans in Montana, a real potential win, particularly if Trump does very well in Ohio. He may carry Benny Moreno over the top in Ohio. And Democrats have made some inroads, I think, in Texas. Ted Cruz, I know, is concerned about Colin Allred's campaign, and then Nebraska, a bit of a wild card. But this is looking better for the Republicans, is it not?
It is, but it always was going to look better the closer we get to the election, because the Democrats had a whole bunch of incumbents, and the Republicans had a whole bunch of challengers. So the way every race starts out is the incumbent is well known, the challenger not so well known, unless you have some former governor or what have you, right? And then the races close, right? And then the question is, do they get it across the finish line or not? But if they didn't close, then Republicans would have been like running horrible campaigns, because that's the way challenger races go. That's why in Texas, Cruz is the incumbent. So it's the reverse process where, of course, as you go, the challenger is going to close. And the question's always do they really close in the last 2 to 4 points, or do they really just get their bases in the state? It does overall look more favorable for the Republicans than it did 2 months ago. But I guess my point is it always was going to. And we're seeing this natural path. I would be surprised if Cruz lost. I would be surprised if the Republicans didn't win Ohio. And, of course, I would be super surprised if the Republicans didn't win Montana. And Nebraska, I don't know enough about that crazy situation.
All right, so that would get them to 52 on your scenario. Then the question is whether they can win any of the races in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And those are now look to be 1-point races, at least in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, maybe a little wider in Michigan, although it depends on the survey you see. So that's going to depend in part, too, on does Trump win? And if Trump wins in those states, he may end up helping those Republican candidates. And that would be earth-shaking if Republicans got 54, 55 in the Senate, I think.
Yeah, there's a scenario here where if Trump has a strong finish, he brings over 2 or 3 other senators and brings over the House.
Well, that would be fascinating. Well, look, Mark Penn, I want to thank you for being here. I sure appreciate your time, as always, and as our TV show as well as the podcast. Thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you.
I'm Paul Gigot with the Potomac Watch. We'll leave it at there today, but we are here every day. Thanks for listening.